So please welcome to the New Hampshire Journal podcast, former and possibly future U.S. Senator John E. Sununu. Welcome, Sir Circle. So glad to have you.
How are you, Michael? Good to see you.
I'm doing great. By the way, isn't it annoying to see your brother still on TV? Every time I turn on the TV, they're like, I thought we were done with this Chris guy. What the heck?
Maybe I don't watch as much TV as you. I know he was on one of the news shows yesterday morning, I think. But look, aviation, it's in front of everyone right now.
Right.
Government shutdown. Democrats shutting down government, shutting down DHS, shutting down TSA, at a time when travel is more important than ever. But obviously, we've got some real national security issues that the country is focused on. This is not the time to play politics with government shutdowns of Homeland Security. It's crazy.
And speaking from a pure political flack background, the idea that you're going to stake your politics on nothing happening. Because think about once again, the horror of being under attack and of terrorism attacks. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But just from a pure political strategy standpoint, somebody gets through on a plane and they do something bad. Someone comes across the border and does something bad, and you were not paying the Border Patrol and DHS. It's just so politically stupid. My question to you is, when you talk to people who are, unhappy right now and want to get rid of the Republicans, is it ideological, or is it really just what it appears to be, which is everyone's just so mad at Trump that they're letting it inordinately influence their better judgment?
Well, look, I think there's a lot of that. I think it's just some hardcore left progressive politics. In some parts of the country, in San Francisco or in parts of New York City, that's probably good politics.
Right.
But, look, my whole Senate campaign is do what's right for New Hampshire, right? Stand up for New Hampshire. And when you've got men and women in TSA just trying to do their job, and you're preventing them from getting a paycheck, right, or people in the Coast Guard or Homeland Security doing research, trying to understand the threats to the country, and you're not giving them a paycheck, that's outrageous. I mean, that's where politics has just crossed over into frankly, doing the wrong thing for the people of New Hampshire. And unfortunately, that's exactly where Chris Pappas is today. That's where he's been in the past. He votes with his leadership 99% of the time, even more. And it's just not right for New Hampshire.
So let's talk about some votes and some experience you've had in Congress at a time of war, because you were in Congress in the House in the late 1990s and 2000, and then you had your time in the Senate. And people forget, but we were really busy in the Middle East back then. We had Operation Desert Fox because Saddam was this ongoing problem, long before we invaded. You had, attacks on U.S. embassies, what we now know as Al-Qaeda, et cetera. So when you were in Congress and these issues would come forward, what was your approach to what the U.S.'s stance should be in the Middle East, and also what Congress's role is when it comes time to actually start shooting things?
Sure. Well, look, it goes back really, the fight on terrorism and the issues you described to the taking of the embassy in Iran. With the current conflict now, we have to remember, certainly Iran has been at war with the United States for 47 years. And they're responsible not just for taking the embassy, but for bombing the embassy in Beirut, for bombing the Marine barracks in Beirut, bombing our military in Saudi Arabia, Khobar Towers, bombing the coal, and obviously killing thousands using IEDs in the conflict with Iran. So, the driver here has to be and should be what's in our national security interests, and how do we achieve those national security goals. And in the case of Iran, I think the administration has laid out they simply cannot have access to a nuclear weapon. Their ballistic missile program needs to be eliminated, not just degraded, but really eliminated. And they need to stop this 50-year funding of global terrorism. Those are in America's national security interest. Those are the objectives here. And I do think we're on our way to achieving them. And once we've achieved them, the effort will come to a conclusion.
So as soon as you get to this part of the conversation, the answer or the response is regime change. What about regime change? What are you going to do to force Iran to have a different government, et cetera? How do you view the issue of regime change from America's national interest viewpoint?
Well, first, so taking out the top echelon of leadership, 50 at once,
Right.
Will help us achieve those three goals I mentioned. Right. That's why that's important. Right. It's not just the former Ayatollah. It's his command and control,
Right.
his strategic advisors, his military advisors taken out. It obviously makes it much more difficult for the Revolutionary Guard and other entities in Iran to respond. So that's why that was so important. Not so much because we think we're going to get a friendly government
Right.
just by taking out the top 15, 20, or 50 people, but it helps us achieve our strategic objectives. And look, I think what we have learned is what we can't do is go in and try to reconstitute a government that fits our democratic objectives or rebuild a civil society. That's where America has failed in the past. And I think certainly where I draw the line, or at least where I feel we won't succeed or we can't succeed without a very strong, friendly government in place.
So let me try this. If Iran can't build a nuclear weapon, and by can't, I mean can't, not like they agreed not to, because they'll agree to anything. They can't build a nuclear weapon because they don't have the stuff, and they know that as soon as they have three guys with PhDs in the same room, we're going to blow the crap out of them because they have no air defenses. They can't rebuild ballistic missiles, which was their strategy. Build a huge ballistic fence, and inside the fence, build nukes. And the price to take out the nukes would just be too high. Yeah. And by the way, this is something I don't think people talk about enough. Not invading is a decision. Not attacking, not wiping them out is a decision. And that decision is to let Iran arm to the point where it's even harder to stop them. And so eventually you're just handing them a nuclear weapon. And that was the option. Either leave them alone, let them go nuclear, or stop them. So there's that. So if you have those two, nukes, ballistics, they can't fund foreign terror. And every time a Houthi shoots a pop gun, once again, something else blows up. That seems like victory to a lot of us. Does that seem like victory to you?
Yes. And, phrases like regime change and victory, they're always a little loaded. But the way I would phrase it is that absolutely has advanced our national security interests, has dealt with an issue or a set of issues that have plagued Americans, plagued our country at home and around the world for 47 years, right? And the idea of just leaving the status quo and saying, well, that we shouldn't have struck the Ayatollah, we shouldn't have struck his leadership, we shouldn't have struck these ballistic missile operations, is saying, no, we should have just continued on with Iran as this global threat, obviously blackmailing, trying to get sanctions lifted unless we allow them to engage in nuclear weapon production. But also that the status quo is Iran killing Americans and certainly our allies through their proxies. And at a certain point, you have to say that's no longer acceptable to America's national security interest.
So you missed the debate over the Iran deal during the Obama era because you had been replaced by Senator Jeanne Shaheen. I don't know how that happened. Something I forget. Anyway, so she's there. She supported the Iran deal. Looking back now at what Iran spent its time doing between 2012 and 2017, Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, October 7th, deaths in the battlefield, Iraqi-backed militia were attacking U.S. troops in Iraq like 2 years ago. It was one of our little forward bases there. How does that decision to give hundreds of millions of dollars to Iran and let them get back on the global oil market look today?
Look, it looks like what it was, a big mistake, right? And I understand the debate at the time and the effort to try to form a really strong framework to prevent them from developing a nuclear weapon. But it didn't take long to realize that they were not acting in good faith. They were not cooperating. We didn't
I
have
just
the
have to say, this is
information.
my shocked face that you're telling me that Iran did not act in good faith. I'm totally
But
shocked.
it didn't take long to realize that. And the real mistake was still moving forward once this was apparent with these tremendous payments and freeing up of assets for the Iranians. It wasn't hundreds of millions.
That's true.
Most notoriously, there was 1.7 billion flown over in shrink-wrapped cash. Okay, I mean, it sounds like it's made up, but it's not. 1.7 billion in shrink-wrapped cash, but that pales in comparison to the 50 or 100 billion in assets, certainly more than 50 billion in assets that were freed up. And that's the funds that they use to support the biggest global terrorist network the world has seen, whether it's the Houthis or Hamas or Hezbollah, or even things they were doing in Venezuela. All of it was designed to attack and assault America's security interests.
Or they're screwing around in the Straits of Hormuz. And one of the things I encourage people to do is look at one of these charts that shows oil spikes since 1979. And you see, this is nothing. The people are complaining, rightly so. Oh my gosh, gas $4 a gallon. Everyone hates it. But this is nothing new about that. Iran has done this to the oil price again and again because it will not stay in its borders. It is always screwing around outside its borders. So last thing on this before we go to the gas issue. From your time in Congress and the votes you cast and watching the Clinton administration and the Bush administration deal with the Middle East, what did you learn then that informs your view today? And if you were lucky enough to go back to the Senate, would guide you in the future?
And first and foremost, maybe the most important thing is, as I described before, America cannot and never has successfully gone into a country, say boots on the ground, and reconstituted a government in whether it's our own image or our own liking, right? The rebuilding of a government, of civil society infrastructure, institutions, that has to be done by the people in the country. And, look, in Iraq, since our withdrawal, they've managed it reasonably well. And it's never going to be a reflection of American democratic and constitutional values, right? And that was some of the hubris that clouded our thinking in Iraq. So that, I think, is the single most important lesson. A second, I would say, define the national security objectives clearly and specifically going in, right? The three that we talked about. I think that's been done reasonably well. I mean, the president is prone to dramatics. He loves a press conference. But those three objectives were stated early, and they continue to reinforce them. And I think they're the right things to focus on.
Yeah, trying to follow the storyline with only one narrator named Donald Trump is just, I mean, at one point we're going to be talking about building casinos in Tehran. I mean, that's just where the guy is. By the way, you forgot lesson number 3. The first person who says, let's give Iran money, punch them in the face. Because that's always, as long as
I'll call that the Graham rule. The Graham rule.
As long as the mullahs run it, do not give them any money. This is so easy. I don't understand. And yet, Senator Shaheen got that wrong. Representative Pappas generally follows her foreign policy view. And I would just point out to people who ask about Senator Shaheen's troubled foreign policy, I point, she was a Jimmy Carter person. What do you expect? She thought Carter was right and Reagan was wrong. So, geez Louise. But
and since you invoked Reagan, I will make this point, though, because I think it's an important one. And I'm really surprised even the mainstream media doesn't eventually come to this point. When Ronald Reagan proposed a ballistic missile defense, he was mocked ruthlessly by the media and by the Democrats and the left. And today we see the incredible importance and capability of ballistic missile defense across the entire region. We led in that effort. America has led in that effort. We need to continue to lead in that effort. But you can't underscore how important it was for Reagan to brave all of the criticism and insist that we pursue this. And when the Soviets tried to get us to give it up, he said no.
And I would also, I think even more telling is the example of the medium range nuclear missiles going to Europe. There was a huge pushback from the left. This is terrible. You're going to start World War III. They made that ABC news show morning after. Remember that
I remember
thing? And the people forget this. The largest political protest in Western history occurred in London over those missiles. But Reagan said, we can beat them. We can win. And you know what? In 1989, we won, and nobody went back and apologized. You know what? I was an idiot. You were right. No one went back and said, oh, what about, but Reagan could have done something wrong. All they said was, you won. And that's my message to foreign policy people, including the president. In Iran, if you win, no one will care that gas prices hit $4 for a month. If you lose, there is no thing you can do to say that you did something else. You just got to win. So speaking of winning, you want to win. You want to win this election. The person that is almost certain to be the Democratic nominee, you of course have a primary with former U.S. Senator Scott Brown, but whoever wins that's probably going to be facing Chris Pappas. He says, I got a great idea. Let's get rid of the federal gas tax, until October, I believe it is, and help Americans out while we have this wartime gas price hike. And you attacked it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, a Republican anti gas tax cut. What the heck? So
I'm not against cutting gas taxes. I'm against hypocrisy. And okay. Chris Pappas supported raising gas taxes, and now suddenly he's against it. In 2019, he said this is something we should look at. Maybe even more devastating, he voted for $100 billion in energy taxes as part of the Build Back Better Act. And this, New Hampshire, people are struggling with their home heating bills, and he is voting for higher taxes on energy. And it's just another example where he's out of touch with the state. You've got to stand up for New Hampshire first, for our families, our voters, our workers, and not raising energy taxes is one of the ways you do that. And he's been on the wrong side of that issue over and over again.
So one of the arguments that people who want to keep pushing for renewables and say, forget, natural gas, et cetera, is, well, it'll take 5 years to bring a natural gas, plant here in New Hampshire online if you wanted to do that, even if you could get the natural gas, which of course, New York and Massachusetts won't let us have. But my response to that is, well, who was in Congress 5 years ago?
Sure.
If I'm not mistaken, it was Senator Shaheen, Senator Hassan, and Representative Pappas. So do you agree that there were things that elected officials could have been doing to make it easier for us to get the cheap Pennsylvania gas, but instead they did the opposite? They made it harder by stopping development and subsidizing renewables.
Look, Democratic leadership prevented gas pipelines coming from New York, coming through Massachusetts that would bring safe, clean, cheap natural gas to New Hampshire. So they stood in the way of that kind of investment of energy infrastructure year after year after year. I mean, Democrats stood against the Seabrook nuclear power plant, which has been one of the most successful, efficient power generators in New Hampshire history. They essentially shut down the construction of the second unit at Seabrook. And they have constantly pushed for mandates that force the providers to buy electricity at above market rates, and then they stick the customers with those costs. And we need that to stop. And obviously, that's the kind of consumer-friendly, affordability-friendly energy policy that I'll fight for in the Senate.
So our sidelines into Reaganism made us go a little long. So I want to take one last question for you, which is, when you talk about New Hampshire first, what is a policy in DC that you would focus on trying to change because of its disproportionate impact on New Hampshire? I mean, for example, there's no reason to talk about solar up here because solar is always going to be weird because of the weather. What I'll give you a flip one, which the president actually mentioned, which is the Jones Act. It's illegal to send Texas and Louisiana natural gas here by a ship unless that ship is American made and operated. Well, there are like 3. In fact, I think there's actually 0. I just tried.
Yeah, sure. Look, the Jones Act raises energy prices for everyone.
Us. But particularly for us, because we rely on natural gas more than other regions.
But others do as well. But you're right. It makes no sense in this day and age. It does nothing but raise costs. And I would certainly support getting rid of it. Look, but something that's a little bit more New Hampshire specific are the strings and the regulations placed on our education funding and our workforce training funding, right? Companies and employers in New Hampshire know far better than anyone in Washington, D.C., where we need to apply worker retraining, worker relocation money, worker support money. But we've got 7 or 8 different programs coming from the federal government, each with their own set of regulations. It makes no sense for New Hampshire. New Hampshire administrators and parents and teachers know far better how to improve New Hampshire education than anyone in Washington, D.C. And yet we still labor under all kinds of strings and regulations and red tape for our education funding. Cut that red tape, cut those strings, give New Hampshire the power.
So the Johnny Sununu education and retraining bill, what would you do? Like, would you condense it to a single agency? Would you block grant it? Have you thought through that far yet?
A, consolidate the funding into fewer streams, and B, give the state far more flexibility to apply it in the area of education or the area of worker retraining to fit what makes the most sense for New Hampshire. Put New Hampshire first.
Yeah, and you think about what the complaints from employers, and obviously there are a lot of them right now, energy prices being one, housing being one, but that's because of workers. And the third is workers. Like, there's just not enough workers. The idea that we would have potential workers in the state who are just lacking training that they could get at the community college or whatever, that's got to be a frustration.
We can do better. We will.
Well, thanks, listen, Mike. I really appreciate your time. And anytime you want to talk about the good old days of Ronald Reagan, sign me up, Senator. I appreciate it.
It was a long time ago, but it's an important lesson. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.